Classification is the grouping of things based on their similarities. So for example, we just learned how to classify things into living and non-living things. Now let's learn how to further classify living things into more specific categories. There are 4 types of living things. First is plant, second animals, third fungi, and fourth bacteria. These are very broad classifications of all living things on Earth. Firstly, let's look at how we can classify plants. We can classify plants into many ways, such as their sizes, how big or small they are, and their habitats, if they live underwater, in the rainforest, in the desert, and many more. We can also classify them into flowering and non-flowering plants. What are flowering plants? They are plants that bear flowers, meaning that they can grow flowers at some point of their life cycle. Flowering plants produce seeds for reproduction. Some examples of flowering plants are Isora. I'm sure you have seen this flower around the neighborhood or along the streets before. Water lilies are also flowering plants, and lemon trees also grow flowers, so they are flowering plants. Since we know flowering plants grow seeds, do you know where these seeds are stored? The seeds grow in the plant's flowers. As the flower develops, it becomes a fruit. So now the seed is then in the fruit. When you eat fruits, do you notice that there is always seeds inside? They can be very, very small or also very big. We just learned about flowering plants. Now let's learn about what are non-flowering plants. Non-flowering plants are plants that do not produce flowers. They produce spores or cones for reproduction. So they do not produce seeds, unlike flowering plants. Some examples of non-flowering plants are ferns, mosses, and conifers. Over here, this is a bird nest fern, a type of fern. Beside it is mosses. These are examples of plants that reproduce by spores. Next, we have conifers. They produce cones that looks like this, and it almost looks like this tree upside down, right? This reproduced by cones. In summary, we can classify plants into 2 categories, flowering and non-flowering plants. Flowering plants produce seeds, whereas non-flowering plants produce spores or cones for reproduction. We are now done with plants. Now let's move on to classification of animals. There are many different types of animals. We can classify them in many ways, like do they live on land or underwater? Do they lay eggs? Do they have feathers? And many more. But before we classify them into such detailed categories, we need to know the 6 different groups of animals. They are fish, amphibians, birds, insects, mammals, and reptiles. Today we will only be covering fish, amphibians, and reptiles. Let's start with fish. Fish live in the water. Some examples of fish include shark, ray, eel, and tuna. There are many other species that are in this category of fish, like the ones you even eat for dinner. Fish have gills to breathe underwater and to get more oxygen around them. As you can see over here, this picture, the gills are located beside the eyes and their mouths. Because we don't have gills, like fish, we cannot breathe underwater. Fish also have scales, fins, and a tail. You can see over here, these are where their fins are. And this is their tail. The gills are over here, and their entire body is covered with scales. A fish's fins and tail helps it to move and swim around. Fishes are cold-blooded animals. This means that they cannot change their own body temperature. Most fish lay eggs, but some give birth to live young. We can then classify fishes into 2 categories, fish that lay eggs and fish that gives birth to live young. Examples of fishes that lay eggs include the clownfish. If you remember at the start of the Finding Nemo movie, they show that the clownfish eggs were destroyed. Okay, another example would be salmon. And on the other hand, fishes that give birth to live young include guppies, a small fish, and sharks. They both do not lay eggs but instead give birth to their young. We are done with learning about fishes. Now let's move on to amphibians. Amphibians are special. They can live on land and in water. They have smooth, moist skin. Examples of amphibians are frogs, newts, and salamanders. Amphibians are cold-blooded, just like fish. This means that they cannot change their own body temperature also. They lay jelly-covered eggs in the water and do not give birth to live young. These eggs usually float on the surface of the water. Look at this picture of the frog eggs. Its eggs have a clear jelly outer layer and you can find them in water bodies. When the egg hatch, the young will not look much like their parents. This is because most amphibians go through metamorphosis, a process of a big change. This is a tadpole, which is a frog's young, and this is the mother frog. They don't look very alike, do they? Since amphibians have a really special and different life cycle, let's learn more about it. After the young hatch from the egg, amphibians have gills to breathe underwater just like fishes. They then gradually grow legs and develop lungs while still living in the water. When they become adults, they are able to breathe air and use their lungs with their fully developed lungs. And together with their fully developed legs, they can start living on land. This is the life cycle of a frog, which is an amphibian. Firstly, a mother frog lays its jelly-like eggs in the water. And once the eggs hatch, tadpoles come out of it. It looks like black fishes. The next stage is when they start forming their hind legs. And then all four legs form. And over here, their tail also starts to grow shorter and shorter. Once they have developed their lungs, the legs, and their tail is short, they can start living on land like the adult frog. Amphibians, we have birds. Birds are warm-blooded animals. All birds have 2 legs, wings, feathers, and a beak. For this bird over here, we can see that it has 2 legs, wings, feathers that are covering its entire body, and a beak. A beak is the bird's mouth, and it can come in many various shapes and sizes depending on what the bird eats. Birds lay eggs in a nest. Once their eggs are laid, a parent bird has to incubate them, which is to keep them warm. This hen and this penguin over here are sitting on top of their eggs to keep them warm for them to hatch. Most birds fly, but not all do. For example, penguins cannot fly, but they can use their wings to help them swim. Ostrich also cannot fly. We call birds that cannot fly flightless birds. We can then easily classify birds into birds that can fly and flightless birds. Some birds that can fly include the hummingbird, eagle, and pigeon. Flightless birds include the penguin, ostrich, and the kiwi, which has the same name as the fruit. Birds are one of the most colorful animals on the planet. In many cases, brightly colored birds are male, while the females are less brightly colored. The males use their bright colors to attract females for mating. Here you can see the difference in color of a male and female peacock. The male peacock has a colorful, majestic display, and its body is bright blue in color, whereas the female is definitely less brightly colored and mostly brown. And that's all you need to know about birds. We will learn more about the other animals next time. Thank you for listening.